So we'll begin at the beginning. It's about the creation of the world. So it says, Bereshis, bara, Elokim es hashamayim es haaretz. The God, basically the first verse in the beginning of the 5 books of Moses, that stating that God created the world. So there's a famous, one of the most famous medieval commentators, Rashi, who's a running commentary on basically all 5 books of Moses, in fact all of Tanakh, on the Nevi'im, Ksuvim, all on the Talmud. It's just amazing, as I said, if he just sat there writing everything without thinking for a second, it would have been amazing the fact that he did so much. It is before the age of computer, where you actually had to take the pen, stick it into, and every couple of minutes, re-dip it in. So it's just amazing in terms of how much he wrote. But he's one of the classic commentators on everything. And we might as well look at the way his introduction to the book of Bereshis. So I might as well read it in Hebrew since we're in an advanced class, right? But if you prefer, you could just follow it on the bottom. Basically, it summarizes Rashi in the English, but I'm reading it in Hebrew, I'm explaining it, so it doesn't make a difference. So Rashi writes Bereshis, so Amar Rabbi Yitzchak. So he quotes this Rabbi Yitzchak, and there's a whole discussion among the commentators, who is Rabbi Yitzchak? Who is this Rabbi Isaac? We don't find him anywhere else in the commentary. So some explain, very interesting, that it was Rashi's father. Rashi's father wasn't known to be a big Torah scholar or rabbi. He probably was a businessman. But he wanted to teach us the foundation of the world. The foundation of creation is gratitude. The first thing you have to recognize is someone put you in this world. And of course God plays a role. We know we have 3 creators: God, Mom, and Dad. Not necessarily in that order, but we have 3 creators. So Rashi's pointing it out right away. One of the elements of the 5th commandment of out of the 10 is the commandment to honor one's mother and father. And that's based on the concept of gratitude, that we realize even though we might not, most people do love their parents, but let's say you don't, and let's say you don't have the best parents. But interesting, the Torah writes, honor one's mother and father. It doesn't say to love them, because it's the institution you have to love. The fact they brought you into this world, that by itself is enough to be thankful for what happened. Similarly, God created the world, so therefore we have everything to be thankful for. In fact, what are the Jewish people called? We're called Yehudi, Judah, Yehud. That's what the Hebrew word means, Hodah, admittance, that you basically recognize that everything is from God, that there's a creator. And in fact, it's interesting, when we go to synagogue, and whether it's Shabbos, during the week, so we do a silent Shemona Esrei, a silent Amidah prayer, and then the cantor, the chazan, he repeats it, they sing different songs, and basically we listen to the cantor, the chazan, except there's one part of davening that we don't listen to someone else, we actually say it ourselves, and it's the part in davening of Modim Anachnu Lach, which means basically, God, thank you. There's 3 sections in the Shemona Esrei, 19 blessings during the week, and 7 on the Sabbath. So the beginning and end are always the same. The first 3 begin with praise, and the last 3 are with thank you. So when it comes to saying thank you, you can't have any messenger. For the rest of the davening, we could listen to the chazan, and he could daven for us, and we could listen along. But when it's time to thank someone, to show gratitude, you can't send a messenger, you have to do it yourself. So that's where Rashi wants to begin. His first 3 words, quoting his father, teaching us the importance of creation, and realizing, whether it's our parents and God, that the essence to happiness is you have to have gratitude. Because you see many people going around always complaining, bitter, they're always finding the negative in things, and most of these people, it's about them in the many issues. I'm not going into a psychological study, but one element of it is that basically they're lacking gratitude. They don't appreciate the situation. There's no perspective. How it's true, they could have more, things could be better, But first step is you have to appreciate what you have. If you don't appreciate what you have, it's never going to make a difference. As the rabbis tell us in chapter of our fathers, Pirkei Avos, Ezehu Ashir, who is the wealthy individual? Hasameach bechelko, who is happy with their portion. The one, not whether you make 20,000 a year, 50,000, 100,000, you may or may not be happy. There's probably not much difference. I don't mean someone who's afflicted with poverty, that's a different situation. You don't have food on the table, and etc. You don't have a house to live in, so that's much harder to. But let's assume you have the basic needs. So whether you're making 50,000 or 500,000, you might be more comfortable if you're making 500,000, but you're not necessarily going to be happier. In other words, the one who is happy with what they have, that's the person who's going to be happy, and that's the person who's rich. In fact, Ashir, how do you spell Ashir, which means rich in Hebrew? Ayin, Shin, Yud, Resh. So Ayin stands for Einayim, your eyes. Shin stands for Shinayim, your teeth, your mouth. Yadayim, your hands. Raglayim, your legs. Who's the rich person? I'm not talking about rich in money. The one who has a mouth to talk with, eyes to see, hands and legs. If you appreciate the basic things we have in common with an animal, then you'll be happy. If you wake up and that's what Modani is, but thank you God, we're alive, we're healthy, we can walk around. If we gratitude begins with the basics, and once you have a basic philosophy, then usually the rest flows out. We all have challenges in our own life, that we don't, things go against the grain, but that's all part of the ups and downs.
Sorry. Hello? Hello?
Hello? Hello? So that's how Rashi begins, telling us the importance, but that doesn't have to say it. As we know in Judaism, actions speak louder than words. You could talk about it all you want, but Rashi puts it into action. He quotes his father. He doesn't. You could say you respect your father and you do it. Obviously, action is actually doing it. But here, the first step in the first three words, he quotes his father to tell us the importance of recognizing the concept of gratitude. So let's move on now. What he actually does say. So, Lohaya Sarach. I'll explain in English, and you can follow on bottom, however you prefer. Lohaya Sarach lahadchio es haTorah. Ella me'achodesh hazeh lachem shehi mitzvah rishona shenitzvanu b'Yisrael. In other words, the Rashi says, really he's bothered by how the Torah begins. Like, what is this whole book of creation? Here we begin with the creation of the world, the creation of Adam and Eve, and then we go into Abraham, and then Abraham and Sarah, all the fathers and mothers, and Joseph and the brothers. Why are we beginning? What do we need the whole book of Genesis for? If he's saying if the whole purpose of the Torah is to keep the commandments, so let's begin with the good stuff. Why we have to wait until the book of Exodus till we get the first. There are commandments in Genesis. The commandment of having children, being fruitful and multiply. The commandment to Abraham about circumcision. We have a couple of commandments in Genesis, but those are commandments given to individuals. They aren't commandments binding on the Jewish people. It's not until the first commandment when the Jewish people were leaving Egypt and God spoke to the Jewish people directly, that's the first mitzvah given to the Jewish people. The fact that I have to do circumcision today isn't because it was given to Abraham. I mean, it's a nice story, and we learn the history, and we follow Abraham and Sarah around, we learn how to become a mensch. That's all true. But in terms of binding on us, any commandment isn't binding until it was repeated on Mount Sinai. So So that's what Rashi is asking here. Why begin with all this interesting creation and Abraham and Isaac and Sarah and Rivka? Let's just get to the good stuff, the commandments. So Rashi answers, you know why? Mishum koach ma'asav higiu yamo. Laseis lahem nachlas gayim she'im yomer umas ha'ulam Yisrael listim atem shekavashem artzo shiva gayim heim omer lahem kol aretz al kadosh baruch hu hi. So basically it's saying is as follows, that God, that we know that there's going to be, we know, because Rashi's writing this many years ago, we certainly know today that one of the hot spots in the world is going to be the land of Israel. There'll be a lot of controversy, whose land is it, etc. I'm leaving politics out of the picture. I'm just quoting what Rashi's saying here. So Rashi's saying, you know why the Torah began with the story of Genesis, that God created the world? Because God wanted to set the precedent, tell you know what? God created the world, and He gave the Jewish people the land of Israel. It actually says, as we'll get to, He says the 7 nations actually lived in the land of Israel first, and God said, now I created the world, I'm giving the land of Israel to the Jewish people. So of course, let me just tell you off the bat, this isn't a source for Gentiles, this is a source for us. You're not going to convince anybody who thinks the land belongs to their religion, and this isn't a quote for them, this is a quote for the Jewish people. Sometimes we have to realize that, the land of Israel is ours. God created the world. It was a tremendous gift to the Jewish people. Not everyone's allowed to live in it. We're just saying the Jewish people, it was given to them. It's our homeland. And he's pointing out that's why the Torah began with the creation of the creation. Why not begin with the commandments? So he came out with the commandments because he wanted to first establish the fact that God created the world and everything belongs to God, and He gave us the land of Israel. Hence, we have the book of Genesis going through the creation. That's what Rashi answers. The question I have on this is, that still doesn't answer the question. What do you mean doesn't answer? It sounds like a good answer. It is a good answer, but doesn't answer why it has to begin with Genesis. That would be true. You could have made a book right before Joshua. You could have put it somewhere else. You can tell me that later. It still doesn't explain why does the Bible have to begin with that? It could have happened later on. Yeah, Ira.
Yeah, it just seems to me, maybe I'm not reading it right, but I think within the first couple chapters of this parsha, a lot of the commandments are starting. Honor thy mother and thy father. I am the Lord thy God. Thou shalt have no other God before me. Remember the Sabbath and keep it holy. That's all in Bereshis.
100%. That's what there are plenty of commandments in Genesis, but this is more learning the history, the ethics. In other words, the question is, why do I have to keep Shabbos today? It's not because it was given in Genesis.
No.
It's something that. Yeah. No, correct. The whole Genesis is full of commandments and ethical lessons. Rashi was pointing out, in terms of binding from a legal system, when does it become binding on the Jewish people? Later on Mount Sinai. That's all. 100%. Bereshis is full of lessons and mitzvahs, as you said.
The other thing is, it gives us a timeline. It's the first thing that it gives us in the beginning.
100%. So obviously
there's nothing, and now there's something, and that's
exactly, which is the big difference between God and human beings. Is God is the only one who has the ability to create what they call yesh me'ayin, to create something out of nothing. We have the ability to take things, and then we see with tremendous technology today, in terms of they didn't have computers back then, iPads, iPhones. We could take the raw materials now, and through the knowledge of all the years learning on the previous generation, obviously the technology today is much better than it was, whether it's making cars, making phones, anything, that's what we build on. But, right, God is the only one that has the ability to actually create something out of, something out of nothing. So that's a major difference between that. And then they point out that what is Rashi? So Rashi's saying something else. In addition to saying that God created the world and gave it to us, but he's telling us something equally as important. He's saying, Koach Maisav Higiliyamo. In other words, the question is, I could still know God created the world and put it in the book of Exodus, but, it still makes sense to put it in the beginning, but Rashi is saying more than that. He's saying something else, that a person can have the greatest gifts in the world. Let's say you could have a copper find under your house, natural gas, oil, you have diamonds, you pick whatever you like. But if a person doesn't know it's there, if you have a piece of glass if you have a diamond where you think it's a piece of glass, it's not going to be valuable. In other words, you could have something valuable if you don't know what you could do with it, or you know that it exists, it's not going to do you much good. So what Rashi is telling us is, it's true that it's all about the commandments, but the commandments are great. But before we begin with commandments, you got to know what a human being is capable of doing, how great we could be, and conversely, how low we can fall. And that's ironically, when we go through the whole book of Genesis, I don't know if we're going to go through the whole book. Here it ends after Abraham, but when you read it in every Shabbos, when you hear it in synagogue, it's amazing how, we don't have to look too far. First you had Cain and Abel. Now we're going to be reading Noah this week, the flood, then with the tower, and then Abraham and Sodom and Amorah. So throughout the book of Genesis, you see the total contrast between how great, how righteous people are, and conversely how wicked a city can be, individuals. And that's what the Torah wants to begin with the book of Genesis. It's all about the creation, not only of the world, but the creation of people. That's what Adam, Noah, Abraham, etc., all this whole list. The first thing we have to know is our potential. If you don't think you can do good, if you don't think you're capable, then obviously it's not going to make a difference. We just finished all the high holidays and then some, and we're safe until Hanukkah. But one of the major themes of the high holidays was tshuva, repentance, to return to God, etc. So we used to on Yom Kippur, in most of the prayer book, where we're there most of the day saying, basically, I'm sorry, I did this wrong, or Ashamnu, Bagadnu. Most of the prayer book on Yom Kippur, it's full of what they call vidoy, oral confession, that we're asking God for forgiveness. And it's all true. But there's one thing that you have to understand before all that. If you don't, in other words, the person says, what do you mean, I'm sorry? I'm not saying I'm sorry if I can't jump off a building and fly. I maybe would like to fly, I'm not sure if I would or wouldn't, but I don't have the choice. I'm not apologizing, human beings can't do that. In other words, it's not in my ability to go ahead and jump off a building and fly. So I'm not going to be, I'm not going to say, hey God, I'm sorry, I can't fly. Well, I can't fly, and then nothing to be sorry about, I don't have the capability. So the first step of tshuva is, you have to realize you can do better. If you don't think you're capable of doing more than you're doing now, then what do you mean you're sorry? What are you sorry about? If you're saying you can't, then there's nothing. It's only if I haven't yet, or I'm working on it. I know I can do better. If you don't feel you can do better, then you're not really doing tshuva. You're not really doing confession. Confession is something. You know what? I could pray a little better. I daydream too much. I should, maybe I'll pay more attention in synagogue. Maybe I should be studying more Bible. Different things I could be doing more. So then I have reason to say I'm sorry about. But something I should be giving more charity, doing more acts of loving kindness, those things. So I have to believe I could do it. If I don't feel I could do more or could do better, then so that's the first step. The first step of anything is to realize you can. So that's what Rashi is saying here. Before you get to all the commandments, you first have to realize what your abilities are. So first, let's go through the whole book of Genesis, see how great a person could be, how high you could turn into, and conversely, if you don't be careful, you don't watch yourself, don't get overconfident, well, I'm great, I'm okay, and then, just rely on that. The whole book of Genesis is all about humans and going the ups and downs of our life, and learning life lessons. Yeah, Bernard.
Rabbi, could you tell us where Rashi actually fits in? We must remember that when Rashi was born, the Torah had already been given to the Jewish people for 1400 years, at least. So all this time had gone by, and had this gone by without any understanding of what all this was about? Did we have to wait for Rashi to explain it to us 1500 years later, after the Torah was given? Were there other commentators that people looked at long before Rashi? Must have done them.
Yeah, well, actually, Rashi actually is probably quoting. He's not necessarily he isn't necessarily quoting his own. He's quoting Midrashim. He's quoting from his father. But 100%, the assumption is Rashi is the one who just put it down in print for future generations. Not that the people before him didn't know it. We have the Talmud, and other things before Rashi.
Yes.
So Rashi's talking to the people during his time and after. But the working assumption is the people before, knew the messages as well. Yeah, and of course, in Judaism, we believe, I think this is the name of the class, out of the 70 faces, Shiva Panim La Torah, 70. So, as we know in Judaism, there's not one right way, there are many right ways. Because we have principles given to Moses at Mount Sinai, and then within, not everything a person, it's not talk radio, you just get up and, everyone has the right to their opinion, but not all opinions are equal. As someone, if you want to give an explanation on Shakespeare or Hamlet, you have a PhD, like who are you to talk? So when it comes, you have to earn it right. Obviously, everyone has their opinions, and you have insights, but obviously, a certain level of knowledge in that area, obviously, you're going to have more credibility. But Rashi, as we'll see, everyone has different. We're all human. We come, we all have our own mind and that, and everyone's going to have different explanations and the truth is, because there's so many people, not everyone's going to talk to me, everyone's going to talk, especially when now we're in the exile, we don't have a Sanhedrin, a one group, because we're out we're out, we don't have a temple, and therefore that's why in fact we come from, that came down to the 12 tribes, like all of Yaakov's kids, because there is no one way, that you need all the different types of ways, because different people relate to different things. Some are more mystical, some are more rational, some are more textual. So different commentators, they work with it. Some are very textual oriented, some are more into philosophy, some are more legal, and that's, and then we'll see throughout the classes, different commentators take totally different, and it's not a matter of right or wrong, they're both right, as it says. There's a dispute in Talmud between the school of Hillel and the school of Shammai, two famous rabbis in the Talmud. So the Talmud has a principle, Elu v'Elu divrei Elokim chayim. That these are the words of God. In other words, both are both right. It's not these and these. It doesn't say they're right. It says Elokim chayim, meaning the life. It's because Judaism is a dynamic. Moses was given the principles at Mount Sinai, but obviously you take the principles today, you could come out with different conclusions. And I always point out, I'll just give an example of that. The example is not so important, but just to illustrate the lesson. That, in other words, I always point out, I'm always asked, Rabbi, does Jewish law change or not? So I say, of course, a Jewish answer. You ask another question. I say, well, it depends what you mean by your question. If you're asking me the same question today, you asked me 300 years ago, I might give you a different answer. So yes, Jewish law does change. But if you're asking about the principles don't change. Let me explain what I mean. So this, again, the example is not so important, just to illustrate. There's a law we're not going to get to it in this class, it's in Vayikra, it's in the third book of Moses, but we all know the special status of the priests, the Kohanim. And like everything, there's privileges and responsibilities. So the privileges, they get called up to the Torah first, they did the work in the temple, etc. And one of the responsibilities are they can't come in contact, they can't go to a cemetery, they can't come in contact with the dead. Of course, if it's your own 7 relatives, your parents, brother, sister, wife, daughter, son, not only can you, but you're obligated to. But barring that, the general rule is the priests Kohanim don't go into cemetery. Interesting, because we believe in the Kohanim are the spiritual leaders. We want to keep the spiritual, we want to have a separation of life and death issues. Like some explain, that's why we have a separation of meat and milk. That meat represents death, it's a dead animal. Milk is life, so we don't mix milk and meat. Because in Judaism, it's important to separate life and death issues separate. We know what happens when when people confuse life and death issues. Like for instance, there's very little mention in the Torah about the next world, even though we believe in the next world. That's one of our major tenets. Yet, even though the next world is eternal, it's what you do in this world that it's going to decide whether you get box seats or whether you're going to be up in the nosebleeds in the upper decks. That depends. It's all in our own hands. Whatever we do in this world, that will determine. The next world's eternal, but what we do, obviously, and it's not random. It's what we do, what we earn in this world. That's how our reward's going to be. So it comes out that so why is the Torah doesn't write about the next world? If you go into the whole 5 books of Moses, you'll never find it. It's alluded to because we know from our commentators. If I was reading through these, I wouldn't find it. Why, if it's such an important principle, wouldn't you think it should be right by Bereshis? Right? You have to tell me, you know what? By the way, the next world. So because the rabbis were concerned, and we see it unfortunately today among other religions, that if you put too much of an emphasis on the next world, you end up negating this world. You become a suicide bomber, or whatever you want to call yourself, a homicide bomber. But basically, what's the point of why am I wasting my time? Let me get straight to the next world. If the next world is all about, then what do I need this world? And that's the danger. So obviously Judaism was well aware of that, and that's why, albeit it's clear that we believe in the next world, it's eternal, but there's a danger in overemphasizing. And that's a general rule in general, the importance of balance in life that we always have, as the Maimonides puts in his Shmona Prakim, in one of his introductions, he writes the importance of following the middle path. That all extremes are bad, we need the middle road. Of course, he says if you have a sickness, then you have to take medication. So he gives his example is you have a rod and it's bent all the way to the left, and you want to get it back in the middle. So what do? If you bend it back to the middle, eventually it's going to start going back to the left. So you have to bend it all the way to the right, not too far, or else you'll break it, and then eventually it will go back. So like there's someone who is sick, so they have a deficiency, so they got to take antibiotic to feel better. So I'll say, you know what? If this person's sick and they're taking medicine and making them feel better, how much I'm healthy, I feel great, I'm going to take some medication, imagine how great I'm going to feel. That's not the way it works. Don't try it at home, because medicine is only if you have a sickness that you have to make up to come the balances. So the Rambam writes, all things being equal, extremes are bad. Of course, if you have something wrong, you have to go ahead and fix it. But the middle road is the golden path, as Maimonides puts. And doesn't mean, as I pointed out, doesn't mean on every issue you have to be a moderate, meaning you can obviously, if people are going to be passionate over different issues more. You might be over Eretz Israel, tzedakah, learning. Everyone has their own, and they should have. Everyone has their own pet peeves they really feel strongly about, and that's why everyone has different ones. That's why everything. Some people have to go to hospital visits. Some have to make sure this is done. Everyone has their own things, and that's great. It should be that way. We all shouldn't be doing the same thing all the time.
Excuse me, I have a question.
Sure.
I'm a Kohen, but my brother does not go on the cemetery. Why am I allowed on the cemetery?
No, actually, that's good, because actually I was going back to the example I was in the middle of. So the Torah tells us, Emor el Kohanim, speak to the Kohanim b'nei Aharon. It says the sons of Aaron. The law only applies to the men, not the women. Women can go to the cemetery. It's a special rule only for the men. In fact, as I'm leading to this. The question is, so what about, so that's black and white in the Chumash. Men, a male Kohen cannot go to the cemetery. A wife of a Kohen, the daughter, they all can. Even though the question is, what about the wife of a Kohen who is pregnant? Is she allowed in the cemetery? So this, practically speaking, the custom in general is pregnant women, even if they're not the wife of a Kohen. That's just a minhag. It's not, if a person for Shalom Bayis and they want you to go, you can go. But the general, because obviously the pregnant woman is the idea of life, double life, your life, you're carrying life, and the cemetery represents death. So therefore, that's the custom. Again, it's just custom, not that you can't go, but the custom is in general that pregnant women, whether you're a Kohen Levi Yisrael, you wouldn't go anyway. But getting back to this, what about a wife of a Kohen? So the concern is why, because maybe it's a male, maybe they're having a boy, and therefore then they can't go into the cemetery. So the traditional answer a couple hundred years ago would have been that it's okay to go in. Why would it be okay to go in? Because we have to go to the general rules. We have a general rule. A doubt regarding a biblical law we're strict on. A doubt regarding a rabbinic law we're lenient on, because obviously biblical is stricter, rabbinic is lenient. And if there's a double doubt, even on a biblical law, we're also lenient. So let me explain. So it's a biblical law for a priest or Kohen not to go to a cemetery. So therefore, if you're in doubt whether it's a boy or a girl, then you wouldn't be able to go. But this is a double doubt, because one doubt is maybe it's a boy, maybe it's a girl. And unfortunately, not every pregnancy makes it to fruition. There's miscarriages. So there's one doubt, we don't know if it's a boy or a girl. And there's a second doubt whether the baby's going to make it. So it's a double doubt. So 300 years ago, the answer would have been yes. Even the wife of a priest, of a Kohen, could go to a cemetery. Why is today different, or potentially? Because today we know with modern technology, we have something called the sonogram. And many women do it, not just the women, even if they don't want to know. Doctors do it just to check the health of the fetus. So let's say a person so today you could take a test and you could find out if it's a male. So therefore, if you found out it's a male, it's no longer a double doubt anymore. So therefore, what's the principle? A doubt regarding a biblical law we're strict on. So I'm just pointing out, the example that is I'm just pointing out that 200 years ago the answer would have been yes, this person could go to the cemetery. But today, because of modern technology, the facts are different. So I'm pointing out the principles don't change, but clearly if you take the same principles and apply them to a different reality, you're going to get to a different conclusion. So that's and there's many examples of that. So that's why. But it's good you remind me. That's why I brought it into the. But that's what it points out here, that that's what the Torah is eternal. So all these lessons we're learning, the principles. Obviously, the situation, the context might not apply, but all the lessons we'll see from the commentators up until this day, we learn out the Torah isn't just a history book. If it was, it'd be a pretty lousy one. It skips a lot of major facts. It goes out of order. It's not a good history book. It's a book of life, that we learn life lessons from different things that they put in, and through all the rich Jewish tradition, as we'll be going through all the different commentaries. We're not going to go through all of them. As we'll go through all the different ones, we'll see different lessons we'll learn from creation, from the creation of Adam and Chava, and throughout, and how the lessons, how we learn the lessons today. As they say, you could teach Bereshis to a second grader, which is good, you should, and you could be the great Vilna Gaon, or any great rabbi you want to throw out there, and they'll still learn Bereshis, because the Torah is like a shira, a song, that it has the ability, a song is good for all people. A different nick and a sunya doesn't make you young, old. Some people might prefer different music as you change, but in terms of, it's a song, it's for everyone. The different levels, you can learn the Torah on its simple level, and you could always take it to the next. In fact, that's why they say there are 4 levels. It's called Pardes, which means orchard, but it stands for, each letter stands for something else. The Pei stands for Pshat, which means the literal explanation. There is something to the literal explanation of the Chumash. That's a simple level. Then Reish means remez, illusion. Then there are different things the Torah is only going to allude to. We have to go into our commentary and figure out what the illusions are. And then there's the Dalit is drush, a sermon, a drusha that we make all the time. And then the 4th level is very popular today. It stands for Sod, secret, Kabbalah, mystical. Today with Madonna and other Hollywood stars into Kabbalah. They're probably not into the real Kabbalah, but either way. But today it's very popular, getting into the mystical understandings of things. And you have that always. It's nothing new. You had like Maimonides, who was known as a very big rationalist, and then you always had among the Hasidim or others who were much more into mystical and Kabbalah, and that's not Kabbalah. And they're both within Jewish tradition. Of course, one has to be well grounded in what the Torah says before you worry about to understand what the mystical teachings mean. You have to know, you you can't jump into ninth grade before you did 1 through 8. So it doesn't mean much if you're quoting, it means you don't really know what it means. And even it's hard enough for the great rabbis to know, what a lot of mystical things mean, but we could glean some lessons. So that's what Rashi is saying. So let's just summarize so far. We said that why did the Torah begin with creation? Why not with the commandments? So the first thing Rashi said is a twofold answer. The first answer was to teach us that God created the world, and the land of Israel, among everything else, belongs to God, and He gave it to the Jewish people. Secondly, we said the second-fold answer was, why did it have to be done now? It could have been done in Exodus. And the answer is because the first step is one has to know the potential. Before you start, the commandments are great, but if you don't know how great if you could turn into an Avram Avinu, or a Sarah Imenu, Sarah our mother, or turn into a Sodom and Amorah, you have to first know your potential, what you do and don't do. And since I don't know if there's any baseball fans, but we're still in baseball season because the World Series is tonight. It's actually Game 6, but that's not important. I want to give a baseball parable, so since it's baseball season, I could still use it. So there was this great, Hall of Fame pitcher, Jim Katz, who was a great pitcher, and he made it, I think, Hall of Fame, but an all-star pitcher. So they asked him at the end of his career, so tell me, what was the secret? How did you become this great? Did you have a good coach? Like, who taught you? Was it your parents? Who taught you the secret of being a great pitcher? You know what? My pitching coach. When I first came into the major leagues, when I came into baseball in spring training, I was a rookie. I just got in, and the coach called me over and says, "Tell me, what kind of pitches do you throw?" So he says, my fastball, that's my best pitch. I throw that very good. My curveball is pretty good. Slider, knuckleball, the different type of pitches. I don't know if anyone follows baseball here, but it's not important. So he says, okay. So the coach asked, okay, so tell me, so what are you going to work on in spring training? He says, I guess I'll work on my curveball, my knuckleball, my spitball. The coach said, no, you got it all wrong. Your fastball, that is your pitch. If you want to make it in the majors, that's the pitch that's going to carry. Of course, you'll have to get your curve a little better just to break it up a little, throw a couple of slow pitches. But if you want to make it, you got to focus on your fastball. And that's really a lesson in life, is whether it's parents, educators, or any part of life, many times the tendency is to focus on the faults of our kids, our students, or our colleagues, whoever, and ultimately that people forget you have to focus on the strength. That's not everyone's cut out for everything, and everyone has to. That's what Selevan Bereshis is all about: finding what your fastball is, finding about what is your. Everyone has a different natia, a different inclination to do different things in life, and that's why we need everyone to do different things. And therefore, the trick is we don't have prophets today telling us what to do. We have to figure it out through our own, speaking to rabbis, mentors, whoever we work with, to figure out all our potentials, the do's and don'ts. That's what Selevan Bereshis is all about, is figuring out, learning through all the stories and seeing how great one could be, and conversely, how low one can fall. And it's always a human tendency always to focus on the negative, and a lot of times we have to fight ourselves, to realize all the good that's going on. It's all part of the gratitude thing we started with Sam.
Okay, what if someone were to suggest that the reason we are told all these stories before the laws is not only to suggest the conditions of greatness that we can achieve, but also to tell us that we are going to get into situations in which we are going to have to disobey those laws in order to survive. As for instance, Jacob had to disobey the law to honor his father by lying to his father, because if he didn't lie to his father, he wouldn't get the birthright, and if he didn't get the birthright, he very likely would have been killed. So for me, it runs through the Torah. You're being pulled in two directions. Here is the law. If you obey it, you will be a pure person, and that's very, very important. But you may also be a dead person, and it's very important to avoid that too. So part of the reason we are being told these stories is that when we finally get the laws, we will see them as things that represent one way we're being pulled, but not the only way we're being pulled, and that somehow God intends us to be pulled in one direction and never quite to be sure what we should be doing.
100%. The Torah, that's part of the book of Bereshis. That one thing about Judaism is not black and white. And there's definitely, you have, like using your example, I always say, let's say there's a bus, the drunk driver, the bus driver coming down the block, and now the light turns red for him and you have green. So you could, it's green for you, you're right, you could cross, but if you go across the green, you'll be dead right. In other words, so the point isn't being right all the time, it's, it's being alive, but the point being is, as always, we know stealing is bad, but if someone has to save their life, then stealing is good. So you have to take the principle in its proper context. One is, obviously, on one hand, and we find that that's basically the whole Talmud and all the commentators, we always have conflicting, or I should say apparent contradictions. On one hand it says stay away from falsehood, on the other hand we see Jacob doing it, and then you have to reconcile, you have to work out the balance when there's usually something that's usually not never, but maybe it could be with some exceptions, not to murder someone. Of course, murder someone means they're innocent. To kill someone in self-defense, of course, kill the Nazi, someone coming to kill that, of course. But every principle has its general use, and generally being honest. We usually push honesty, but let's say someone comes and says they're looking for someone, if you tell them with this person they're going to kill this person, then obviously someone's life principle takes precedence over telling the truth in this case. So you always have to balance, it's not always clear. That's why you're not always going to have one answer to a question, because you have to take it's taking different principles and weighing them and trying to come to a decision.